The boom wasn't small. It shook my bird feeder, knocked my solar gnome sideways, and sent my cat streaking under the grill like it owed him money. I thought maybe a transformer blew up, or someone's kid lit an M82 close to the fence. But when I stepped outside and followed the sound of sizzling plastic, I saw the real problem. Karen's extension cord, snaked over my fence like a cheap spaghetti noodle, still plugged into my backyard outlet and half melted from the overload. That was the moment I knew. She didn't just steal power. She declared war. And I was about to make her wish she'd invested in candles. It wasn't the first time Karen had pulled something like this. Last December, she plugged her entire 30,000 light Christmas nightmare into my exterior outlet, just for a day. That day turned into 3 weeks, 3 blown fuses, and a passive-aggressive fruitcake that I think may have contained shards of her shattered moral compass. I let it slide back then. Thought maybe it was the holiday stress, maybe she didn't know better. But now? Now she'd escalated from festive theft to full-blown backyard burglary. And my electric bill? Up nearly $200. The thing about living next to Karen is you start to think of your home not as your castle, but as a crime scene waiting to happen. She's the kind of person who names her plants, spray paints lines on shared sidewalks, and refers to HOA rules like she wrote them herself, which, of course, she sort of did. She's on the board. Naturally. No one voted her in, but somehow she got there, like black mold or raccoons in the attic. So when my smart garden lights flickered and my sprinkler system rebooted for the 3rd time in a week, I decided to investigate. I walked the perimeter of my fence with a flashlight in one hand and a voltage detector in the other like some kind of suburban ghostbuster. And there it was, a bright orange extension cord, cheap, frayed, and plugged firmly into the side of my house, looped over the fence like it had a visa to be there. On the other end, Karen's pool shed, glowing like a Las Vegas casino at midnight. I nearly laughed. The woman was running a full-blown backyard rave off my power. I unplugged the cord, naturally. I didn't yank it or make a scene. I just pulled it free, coiled it neatly, and left it dangling over the fence like an unwanted scarf. Within 10 minutes, Karen was at my door. No knock, no text. Just banging on the frame like she was the FBI with a warrant made of entitlement and expired Chardonnay. "I saw what you did," she shouted, not even pretending to be coy. "You mean unplugging my own outlet?" I asked. "It's not just yours. It's on the fence line. That's community property." I blinked. "Karen, my outlet is literally on my brick wall. The one your husband backed into last summer and blamed on poor lighting." She huffed. "It's just electricity. It's not like you're using it." At that point, I was pretty sure she was just trolling me. Or maybe she genuinely believed electricity was some mystical shared force like air or gossip. Either way, I didn't have the patience for a debate with a woman who once tried to report my mailbox for being too blue. I closed the door and did what any rational adult would do. I went straight to my workshop. See, what Karen didn't know is that I design power monitoring systems for a living. I eat circuit maps for breakfast. I troubleshoot voltage spikes while brushing my teeth. If she wanted a war of wattage, she picked the wrong guy. First, I checked my logs. Sure enough, there it was. Power spikes every afternoon around 3 p.m., just when her inflatable unicorn sprinkles fountain kicks on. I traced the data back through my monitoring app and saw the amp load practically tripling at random hours, including one at 2 a.m. Who needs that much juice in the middle of the night unless you're cooking meth or running a bootleg tanning salon? Still, part of me hoped it was a fluke, so I set up cameras. Within 2 days, I had footage of her teenage son dragging the extension cord over the fence like it was part of his morning chores. He even gave the camera a little salute. A salute. That's when I knew this wasn't just Karen being careless. This was policy. This was family tradition. This was generational theft. I went to the HOA with the footage. Their response? Well, technically, she's not modifying your property, so it's a gray area. A gray area. like power theft was just a creative shade of misunderstanding. But I wasn't going to unplug the cord again. That hadn't taught her anything. No, this time I was going to give her power. More than she ever asked for. I started sketching out the design the same night. Something flashy, legal, loud, and perfectly petty. A system that would wait, watch, and then explode, not with fire or danger, but with the kind of sensory chaos that would make a raccoon file a noise complaint. I called it the breaker bomb. It wasn't a real bomb, of course, but when it went off, Karen would wish it was. The trick was making it perfectly legal. No harm, no tampering with the grid. Just a triggered circuit designed to detect an unauthorized current draw and respond with a high-decibel alarm, strobe lights, and a glitter spray that would turn her backyard into Studio 54. I even added a confetti cannon and connected it to a mobile alert system that would ping my phone the second it activated. When I tested it in my garage, the noise alone caused 3 squirrels to abandon their nest and a passing jogger to trip over his shoelaces. It was glorious, but I wasn't going to set it up just yet. No, first I had to make sure she thought she'd won. So I did the one thing Karen would never expect. I pretended to give up. The next day, I removed my lockbox from the outdoor outlet and left it open. I made sure to mow the lawn near the fence line and even coiled her cord neatly beside it like a passive peace offering. Karen didn't say anything, but I saw her smirk when she walked by that evening. By the time the sun went down, the cord was plugged in again, snaking into the darkness like a fuse waiting to be lit. Perfect. She wanted power? I was about to light her up like a Christmas tree strapped to a rocket. By morning, the cord was still there, plugged in and humming softly with stolen energy. Karen had taken the bait so quickly, I almost felt insulted at how little effort it took. But that was Karen, an opportunist of Olympic caliber, and apparently, a connoisseur of other people's electricity. I walked out into my yard with a cup of coffee, made a show of ignoring the cord, and even waved cheerfully at her over the fence. She waved back like we were old friends who hadn't just gone through a passive-aggressive energy battle. The level of delusion was almost poetic. But before I could set off my legal lightning show, I needed to tie up loose ends. First and foremost was the HOA, which had been about as helpful as a screen door on a submarine. They had brushed off my previous complaints with the kind of indifference reserved for old chewing gum stuck to a park bench. According to them, power usage across fences was a non-priority issue unless it posed a structural hazard, whatever that meant. But I had more than complaints now. I had data, footage, and a custom-built deterrent device with its own user manual. I printed out my smart system logs, showing the surge activity that matched Karen's party schedule down to the minute. I highlighted the spikes that occurred overnight and cross-referenced them with screenshots from my surveillance cams. One particularly damning image showed her husband holding a blender on their porch at 2 a.m, cord trailing behind him like an umbilical tether to my outlet. Then, just for fun, I included a copy of my electric bill with the increase circled in red. A final flourish. When I arrived at the HOA office, I expected indifference. Instead, I found mild panic. Apparently, I wasn't the only one Karen had been borrowing from. The woman 3 houses down claimed her decorative koi pond pump had mysteriously stopped working after Karen's last pool bash. Another neighbor said his garage lights were flickering during the exact hours Karen hosted her yoga wine night. Somehow, she'd managed to run a full suburban nightlife operation powered almost entirely by extension cords and Audacity. One of the board members, a nervous man named Todd who always smelled faintly like printer toner, flipped through my documentation with increasing discomfort. When he saw the confetti cannon prototype listed in my report, he raised an eyebrow. "You're not planning on hurting anyone, are you?" he asked. "No," I said. "But I am planning on ensuring she never plugs into my house again." Loudly. Todd sighed and leaned back. "Just make sure you follow noise ordinances." Already done. I even synced it to shut off automatically after 30 seconds. He nodded, clearly relieved that he wouldn't have to deal with a flaming lawsuit between neighbors. Just don't escalate this into a full neighborhood war. Too late, Todd. The war had already started. I was just the only one who showed up with armor. Back at home, I checked the live feed on my phone. The outlet was live. Voltage was flowing. And the trigger mechanism was armed. I didn't have to wait long. At exactly 2:41 p.m., my phone buzzed with the message I had programmed into the alert system. Unauthorized draw detected. System active. I bolted for the backyard, camera in hand. The explosion of noise was satisfying in a way that should probably concern my therapist. The siren blared like a fire truck had parked in my flower bed. Strobe lights flashed against the inside of the fence, casting epileptic disco shadows across Karen's inflatable pool. Then came the piece de resistance. A powerful puff of compressed air launched glitter and confetti high into the air, raining down in a shimmering storm of pink and silver. Karen, who had clearly been reclining with a mimosa on her patio lounger, shrieked so loudly it almost competed with the alarm. Her husband dropped a garden hose and backed into the inflatable unicorn, which collapsed dramatically beneath him. Neighbors peeked out from behind blinds and hedges, drawn like moths to the spectacle. A few recorded on their phones. One kid on a scooter pointed and yelled, "Yo! Backyard rave!" I could hardly contain my grin. Karen came storming to the fence, her robe flapping, glitter sticking to her forehead like a forehead tattoo that read, "I made bad choices." She pointed a trembling finger at me. "What the hell did you just do?" I sipped my coffee. That was the sound of justice. And also a legal deterrent device. You triggered it when you plugged into my outlet again. She sputtered. You could have killed someone. It's confetti and a speaker, Karen. Not a claymore. She looked like she wanted to leap over the fence and strangle me with her cord. But before she could respond, 2 police officers strolled into view from the front yard. Apparently, one of my other neighbors had called them preemptively, thinking the whole thing was a domestic disturbance. I explained the situation calmly and showed them the footage, my device plans, and the data logs. Karen tried to interrupt, but the lead officer asked her to step back and let me finish. "You're telling me," the officer said, clearly amused, "that she's been running her entire backyard setup on your dime?" "For weeks," I said. "And I've got logs and footage to prove it." Karen's voice climbed 3 octaves. "I didn't think it was a big deal. He wasn't even using it." The officer turned to her. "Ma'am, that's still theft." Karen's jaw opened and closed like a malfunctioning ventriloquist dummy. She wasn't used to people telling her no, especially not people in uniform. But the officer wasn't done. "Also, ma'am, you've got about 100 decibels worth of unauthorized sound system out here, and it's violating your city's outdoor ordinance." "But that wasn't mine," she cried. "It was his." They both looked at me. I shrugged. "My system is well within the legal limit. It shuts off in 30 seconds. Her speakers don't." Within 15 minutes, Karen was issued a noise violation, a warning for tampering with private property, and a friendly recommendation to invest in her own generator. She looked like she was about to melt faster than her extension cord had. As the police left, Karen turned to me one last time, now with a desperate, wheedling tone. "Couldn't you have just talked to me?" "I did," I said. 3 months ago. When you plugged in the first time. You smiled, nodded, and said it was just for one night." She didn't reply. Just turned and stomped back through her gate, dragging the glitter-drenched cord behind her like a shame noodle. I picked up the confetti debris, humming a little tune as I went. There would be fallout, sure. Karen wasn't the kind of person to go down quietly. But I had the truth on my side, the law in my pocket, and about 5 more units of breaker bombs in my garage if she wanted to try again. She wanted to play with power. Now she'd learn what it felt like to get shocked. The cord didn't show up the next day. Or the day after. In fact, for a full 48 hours, Karen's fence remained suspiciously quiet, No humming, no soft clicks of drawn current, no sounds of party prep or inflatable unicorns gasping for life. It was eerie, like the calm after a tornado. The kind of quiet that didn't mean surrender. It meant planning. I knew better than to think she was done. Karen never gave up after one glitter bomb. She was like mold, persistent, annoying, and always plotting a comeback the moment you let your guard down. I used the lull wisely. The first version of my breaker bomb had been theatrical, but it was more of a statement than a solution. What I needed now was precision. Something scalable, something layered, something that would make Karen think twice before ever wrapping her fingers around a power cord again. So I built version 2. This one was less party popper and more courtroom exhibit. The core concept remained the same, a smart trigger system designed to detect unauthorized voltage, but this time I added a few upgrades. A decibel monitor that could self-adjust to stay within legal noise limits, a motion-sensitive camera feed that activated whenever the outlet was approached, and a cloud-based alert system that sent a real-time notification not only to me, but to the HOA, my lawyer, and, just for good measure, the town's non-emergency line. I also added one more feature. My favorite. A simple speaker box that would activate when the outlet was disturbed and play a pre-recorded message in my own voice. This outlet is monitored. Unauthorized access will be reported. Step away. I considered using a robotic voice or even a celebrity impersonation for dramatic flair, but decided my own voice was personal, clear. I wanted her to know exactly who she was dealing with. By the time the weekend rolled around, everything was in place. The outlet looked normal, innocent even. The cord was coiled like a welcome mat. And on Saturday morning, like clockwork, the Karen storm returned. This time, she didn't try to hide it. I watched from my kitchen window as she walked straight up to the fence, extension cord in hand, and plugged it in with the kind of defiance you'd expect from someone lighting a victory cigar. Her pool speakers crackled to life almost immediately, blasting some bubblegum pop anthem loud enough to startle a passing jogger. 10 seconds later, the system engaged. The speaker kicked on first. This outlet is monitored. Unauthorized access will be reported. Step away. Karen froze. The camera whirred and tilted slightly, locking onto her face. The light on the unit turned red. The decibel alarm didn't even need to trigger. She panicked on her own. She yanked the cord out like it was a venomous snake and shouted something unintelligible at the fence. I couldn't hear the words, but I could tell from the gestures that they weren't thank yous. 3 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from my system's cloud interface. Karen had returned, this time with backup. Her husband, the guy who always wore socks with sandals and thought carpentry meant duct taping things together, followed behind her, grumbling under his breath. I tapped into the live feed. They were inspecting the outlet like it was a landmine. He even pulled out a little flashlight, which might have been more impressive if it wasn't shaped like a cartoon shark. "This is harassment," she shouted toward my side of the fence. "You're intimidating us." I stepped outside and leaned casually on the railing of my porch. By protecting my own outlet? "It's on a shared wall," she said again, like repeating it would make it true. "No, Karen. The fence is shared. The outlet is attached to my brick. That makes it mine." Her husband chimed in. "But the HOA says..." "They said it's a gray area, remember?" I cut in. "And now that I've set up documentation, footage, and a legal monitoring system, it's not gray anymore. It's lit up in neon and blinking trespass." Karen's eyes narrowed. "We'll see what a judge says." That made me smile. "Please. I'd love to show the footage in court. I've got 8 angles, voltage logs, and your signature on last year's HOA form that says individual exterior outlets are homeowner maintained." I highlighted it in yellow. She opened her mouth again, but stopped herself. Maybe it was the confidence in my voice. Maybe it was the faint hum of the speaker resetting itself. Either way, she turned and stormed back to her house, dragging her cord behind her like a pet that refused to cooperate. But she wasn't done. I knew she'd come back with something bigger, something sneakier. And I wasn't wrong. That night, while I was reviewing my footage and sipping a cold beer, a new alert flashed on my screen. This time it wasn't voltage. No, this time it was motion. From the side yard. I opened the feed. There she was. Karen. In all her late-night stealth glory. Clad in an oversized hoodie, hood up, walking along the side of the house with a flashlight and what looked like a power strip taped to a garden stake. I watched, fascinated, as she knelt beside the shrubbery and tried to dig her way toward the underground power conduit that fed the outlet. Not that she'd actually find it. It was armored, buried 2 feet deep, and sealed in a waterproof case, but the fact that she thought she could tap it like some backyard oil well was both hilarious and disturbing. I hit the call button on my neighborhood patrol app. It wasn't 911 level yet, but it was close. By the time the patrol officer rolled up in his little electric golf cart, Karen had vanished into her backyard like a raccoon with a guilty conscience. But the footage remained. I sent a copy to the officer, to the HOA, and to my lawyer. Then I did something I'd been waiting for since this whole circus began. I filed an official cease and desist. The letter was short, firm, and written in plain language. It cited footage, HOA bylaw references, and a clear warning that any further power theft or property tampering would result in a civil suit. I had it hand-delivered the next morning by a courier wearing mirrored sunglasses and a black windbreaker, just for dramatic effect. He didn't say a word. Just handed her the envelope, nodded, and left. According to one of my other neighbors, Karen stood in her driveway staring at it for 5 solid minutes before stomping back inside. And then nothing. No chords. No music. No parties. It was like she'd vanished, or at least gone dormant. But I knew better. Karen wasn't the kind of problem that just went away. She was reloading, regrouping, and if she was planning something new, I needed to be ready. So I started working on the next version of the breaker bomb. And this time, I wasn't just going to stop her from stealing power. I was going to cut off her access to every single outlet in the community. Legally, publicly, and with just the right amount of spectacle. Karen may have gone quiet, but silence in her case didn't mean surrender. It meant scheming. She was the kind of neighbor who treated peace like a tactical maneuver, just a lull before her next chaotic attempt at dominance. And sure enough, that lull ended 3 days later when my phone buzzed at 5:12 a.m. with a headline from the local news app that nearly made me spit out my coffee. Backyard power war goes viral. Suburban woman blasted by confetti cannon after stealing electricity. There, in full color, was a still frame of Karen mid-scream, glitter clinging to her eyebrows, eyes wide with what I can only describe as the raw terror of a raccoon caught in a dishwasher. Apparently, someone in the neighborhood had uploaded the footage to a Reddit thread titled, "Don't Mess with the Electric Guy." It had been picked up by a TikTok account that specialized in public freakouts, which then got reposted to Facebook, Instagram, and even a local gossip blog. Within 24 hours, Karen wasn't just a thief, she was a meme. The glitter bandit. The voltage vulture. One guy edited the footage to add slow-motion explosions behind her. Another dubbed in a dramatic voiceover, "In a world where chords crossed lines, one man flipped the switch." I knew this would enrage her more than anything else. Karen didn't mind being wrong, but she hated being laughed at. Especially publicly. Her identity was rooted in being the queen of the cul-de-sac, the self-appointed enforcer of etiquette, lawn height, and mailbox uniformity. To her, this was more than embarrassment. This was dethronement. The doorbell rang just after noon. I opened it to find a man in a blazer standing there with a clipboard and the strained expression of someone who knew this was going to be a long day. He introduced himself as a representative from the HOA's legal advisor team. Apparently, Karen had filed a formal complaint, her third in 2 days, accusing me of harassment, endangerment, and defamation. She claimed I had installed military-grade sound weapons and explosives on shared property, traumatizing her and causing emotional distress. I invited him in, poured him a cup of coffee, and walked him through everything again. The footage, the power logs, the blueprints of my legal deterrent system, all of it time-stamped, verified, and sitting on cloud backup. I even showed him the part of the HOA handbook Karen herself had signed that explicitly declared all external outlets on individual homes were private property. He didn't argue. He just nodded, took notes, and quietly admitted he had 3 more Karen-related cases to handle that week alone. She also accused the neighbor across the street of using witchcraft to turn her azaleas brown. He added, almost apologetically. I asked if the HOA was finally going to do something about her. He gave me a shrug that said, probably not, but added, between you and me, she's hanging by a thread. Good to know. But the complaint was just the beginning. Karen wasn't content with just legal threat. She needed retaliation. That afternoon, a truck rolled up in front of my house. A landscaping crew began unloading equipment. Hedge trimmers, leaf blowers, even a riding mower. They marched right onto my front lawn like they owned the place. When I stopped them and asked what they were doing, the foreman blinked and said, "We're here for the HOA-ordered lawn restoration." According to the paperwork, Karen had filed a beautification requisition, claiming my yard was in violation of community standards. It wasn't. My grass was neatly trimmed, edged, and greener than hers. I knew this because she often stared at it with a mixture of envy and hostility, like it was personally attacking her weak sprinkler system. I stopped the crew, showed them my HOA compliance letter, and had them call their office. 10 minutes later, they packed up and left. One guy gave me a thumbs up as he drove off, muttering, "Man, whatever you did to that lady, respect." But Karen had lit the match, and now her world was catching fire. The viral video had reached people outside our sleepy suburb. A local podcast episode titled Suburbia's Spark Plug Showdown discussed the incident, complete with audio clips and commentary. Someone from the high school down the street created a parody account in her name and posted daily Karen quotes over glittery backgrounds. Even worse, the HOA board, previously spineless and passive, was now under pressure from residents who wanted answers. Why had nothing been done about a woman who'd been stealing utilities, harassing neighbors, and filing bogus complaints for years? The final straw came in the form of an HOA emergency meeting. It was called under the guise of community restoration, but everyone knew it was about her. The clubhouse was packed. People stood against the walls, phones in hand, murmuring like it was a courtroom drama. Karen showed up 15 minutes late, sunglasses on, acting like she was a celebrity being hounded by paparazzi. Her entrance was met with dead silence. Then the chairman stood up and presented a list. Not just one complaint. Dozens. Karen had racked up more grievances than any other resident in the past decade. Unauthorized party permits, petty fines, power theft, vandalism. Multiple neighbors had filed statements. A few brought printed screenshots of her social media posts mocking other residents. And then, for the finale, the footage played on the projector. My glitter bomb. Her reaction. The siren. The shriek. The glitter cloud hanging in the air like karma made visible. The laughter was immediate and uncontrollable. Karen turned red. Then purple. She tried to speak, but the chairman raised a hand. "This isn't about embarrassment," he said. "This is about behavior. And this community is tired of yours." The vote was swift and brutal. Karen was stripped of her board position. A formal probation was placed on her property. Any future complaints she made would require co-signatures from 2 other residents. If she filed another false report, she'd be fined. If she tampered with utilities again, she'd face legal consequences. She stormed out before it was over. The next day, a for sale sign appeared in her yard. But I wasn't ready to celebrate just yet. Not until I knew she was really gone. Because someone like Karen didn't go down with grace. She was the kind of person who'd leave one last parting gift. One last cord draped somewhere it didn't belong. And sure enough, when I checked my side gate later that evening, I found a tiny splitter wedged under the fence, wrapped in duct tape, barely concealed behind a bush. It wasn't live. Not yet. But it was a message. A silent one. A final attempt to hold power. So I left it there. And that night, I installed the final version of my device. The one that didn't just scream or flash or glitter. The one that shut down her last move before she could make it. No noise. No mess. Just power returned. And silence at last. Peace is a strange thing in the suburbs. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or applause. It tiptoes in quietly, like the hum of a well-functioning circuit, steady, unnoticed, and completely taken for granted until it's gone. After weeks of Karen-fueled chaos, the neighborhood finally settled into a strange, almost disbelieving calm. Lawns were mowed. Dogs walked in silence. People smiled again without the strained edge of someone afraid their yard might be cited for unauthorized daffodils. And through it all, I waited. Not because I was paranoid, but because I understood the kind of mind I had been dealing with. Karen was the final boss of suburban entitlement. The villain never exits quietly after the last scene. There's always one more twist. But days passed, then a full week. The splitter she had left wedged under my fence remained untouched. I didn't remove it. I wanted her to know I'd seen it. That it was still there. That I was watching. Eventually, it disappeared on its own. Maybe she took it back. Maybe a squirrel dragged it off to build a rage-fueled nest. I didn't ask. I just kept my surveillance running, my system active, and my breakers clean. And then it happened. The moving trucks arrived. Karen was leaving. It was surreal. A slow, noisy exodus of a woman who had once tried to convince the HOA that decorative stepping stones were a violation of the community aesthetic. Now she was yelling at two underpaid movers about scratches on her patio furniture, while half the neighborhood peeked through curtains like they were watching a royal exile. Some folks stood outside and pretended to water their lawns while enjoying the show. A few waved as the last load was packed up. She didn't wave back. She didn't say goodbye to anyone. Not that anyone expected her to. When the final box was loaded and the truck pulled away, I felt something loosen in my chest I hadn't even realized was there. Tension uncoiled. My backyard felt bigger, brighter, less watched. The air itself seemed less judgmental. It wasn't just the absence of her presence, it was the absence of her potential. No more guessing what ridiculous boundary she would push next. No more watching my power bill spike. No more surveillance footage of unauthorized pool parties or garden hose theft. Just the soft breeze of a clean slate. I kept to myself for a couple of days. I didn't want to gloat. The neighborhood had been through enough. But then came the idea, small at first, almost silly, but growing quickly into something irresistible. I didn't want revenge anymore. That part was done. What I wanted now was something better. Closure. So I threw a barbecue. Nothing fancy. Just burgers, corn, music at a respectful volume, and an open invite to the entire street. The turnout was surprisingly strong. People came bearing coolers, side dishes, folding chairs. Even neighbors I barely knew before Karen's reign of terror showed up like survivors of a strange suburban war, relieved to just be outside without judgment. Kids played in the yard. Dogs barked and chased frisbees. And at the center of it all, mounted proudly on a decorative stand beside the grill, was the device that had started it all. The breaker bomb. Clean. Polished. Inactive but gloriously intact. Beside it, a little plaque I'd 3D printed in my garage. In loving memory of Karen's electrical ambitions. May her circuits find peace elsewhere. People loved it. They took photos. One guy asked if he could rent it for his HOA meeting next month. A retired electrician down the block offered tips for a solar-powered version. It was no longer a tool of petty warfare. It was art. A relic. A symbol of victory not through violence or escalation, but through precise, well-calculated pushback. It was proof that sometimes, when done smartly and within the lines, a good old-fashioned neighborhood squabble could have a perfect ending. As the sun set and the grill cooled, I sat on my porch, plate in hand, and watched the lights come on across the neighborhood. My lights, powered by my system, unshared, untouched, and beautifully mine. There were no cords draped over fences, no unauthorized inflatables casting shadows, no wild parties blaring music into the night. Just the gentle rhythm of a community breathing normally again. A week later, the new neighbors moved into Karen's old house. A young couple, friendly, polite. The kind who knocked on doors to introduce themselves and brought cupcakes instead of complaints. The man noticed the outlet by the fence and made a joke about how he'd never dare plug into it without asking. I laughed, said I appreciated the respect, and gave them the lowdown on the area, where to find the good coffee, when trash pickup happened, which neighbors had dogs with loud opinions. I didn't mention Karen. Not yet. Let the house get a fresh start too. But I kept the footage. Not out of spite, but as a reminder. Of how far things had gone. Of how bad things could get when one person refused to respect the most basic of boundaries. It was strange how something as simple as an extension cord could unravel an entire neighborhood. But then again, it wasn't just the cord. It was everything behind it. The assumption, the arrogance, the belief that borrowing didn't require asking. That her convenience outweighed everyone else's rights. That belief was gone now. Burned out like an overloaded fuse. One night, I walked out back with a beer, looked up at the stars, and smiled. The quiet was deep, real. Not the tense kind that came before chaos, but the kind that came after a storm. The kind you earn. I walked past the fence, looked at the outlet, and then up at the sky. I didn't need the alarm anymore. I didn't need the cameras. But I kept them anyway. Just in case another Karen ever decided to test the limits of neighborhood voltage. Because peace wasn't the absence of conflict. Peace was the result of very, very well-documented consequences.